Cell division is another way that we refer to the process of cell replication. So this is the way that we're going to start with cells and then produce additional cells from that. If we talk about the actual process and why we do refer to it as cell division, we're going to start with a single cell, and that cell we tend to refer to as the parent cell. And what's going to happen in that cell is that we're going to really copy everything, or copy all of the stuff that we have inside. And then once we've copied all of the stuff inside, we're going to see that that cell is actually going to split or divide, which is where the term comes from. And so when it divides, we will end up with two cells. Those two cells are going to be referred to as daughter cells. And that would be the whole cell division process. Now, we do have different types of cell division, and that would really depend on the type of cell that we're looking at. So if we're talking about eukaryotic versus prokaryotic cells, we would have differences. And there would also be differences depending on the types of cells that we're trying to produce when we do get those daughter cells. Now, one thing we want to spend more time on and focus on is this part right here, which is the copying process. Because when we do copy what is inside of that cell, really in preparation for the dividing process, one of the most important things that we're going to have to copy is going to be the DNA, or in other words, the genetic information. So let's talk a little bit more about that genetic information. The word genome refers to the DNA within an organism. Now that DNA that we have inside of an organism, the location of it is going to be a little different depending on the cell type, and the overall organization of it will be different as well. So if we start off talking about eukaryotic cells and the genome that we have there, in eukaryotic cells, you really do have three different locations where we find DNA. The nucleus is where we find the majority of the DNA. And when we just use the word genome, and that's all we say, we are really referring to the DNA in the nucleus. And again, that's where most of the DNA would be anyhow. There is also a little bit of DNA located in the mitochondria. We refer to that as the mitochondrial genome. And then we have yet more DNA located in the chloroplast, and that would be referred to as the chloroplast genome. Now let's talk more about this genome that we have located in the nucleus and the organization of that DNA. The DNA that is located within the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell is organized into structures which are called chromosomes. And those I'm showing here in blue. These chromosomes are going to be made up of two different types of molecules. They do definitely contain DNA, but then also along with that, they do have a lot of protein associated with them. And if we look at these structures of chromosomes a little bit closer and we label some of the parts on them, we do have what are called arms on the chromosomes. So this would be called an arm. And then this section that we have on the bottom is also going to be called an arm. And then we also have this structure, this protein structure really, that's located here. In this case, it's in the middle of the chromosome. It's not always going to be located in the middle, but this is called the centromere. The centromere will become very important when we do start the dividing process. So notice that every chromosome is going to have two arms, and it's also going to have one centromere. And if we talk about the very tips of the chromosomes, we can refer to those as telomeres. Now, the chromosomes shown on here are shown in different sizes to represent that these really are different, distinct chromosomes inside this cell. Now, I call them distinct chromosomes because they will contain different information. So I've drawn them as different sizes just to help indicate that they're different, but we could also go through and we could name them or number them. So if I go through here and I give every chromosome a name, and I'm giving it a number name, The information that is located on chromosome number 1 is going to be very different from the information located on chromosome number 2, and so on. This becomes important because sometimes in specific cells you will have 2 copies of a particular chromosome, and then other times we'll only have 1 copy of a particular chromosome. And we do have different names for that, and overall what we're referring to is the ploidy of the cell. Ploidy is the number of copies of a chromosome. Or some people like to refer to this as the number of sets that we have. Now, as we're looking at it on this picture right now, we have just 1 chromosome number 1 and 1 chromosome number 2, and so on. So since that is the case, we would say that we have 1 copy of everything, or of each chromosome. And the term that we use to refer to that is haploid. Haploid is designated with the letter N, or really we're looking at 1N, because N is going to be the number of unique chromosomes that we happen to have. If we look at this nucleus now, what I've tried to represent is that now we have 2 copies of each of these particular chromosomes. So there are 2 small chromosomes, or 2 chromosome number 1s. There are 2 chromosome number 2s, 2 of chromosome number 3, and then also 2 of chromosome number 4. So this is a different ploidy than haploid. In this case, since we have 2 copies of everything, we are going to designate it by putting 2N, and again, N represents the number of unique chromosomes, which happens to be 8, and we called this situation diploid or diploid, and that's because di represents 2. Now, this is going to be the condition of most of the cells that you do find inside of a eukaryotic organism. If we look a little closer at what we're talking about when we have 2 sets of chromosomes within the cell, here we have a close look at chromosome number 3 and the 2 copies of chromosome number 3 that you might find inside of a cell. So again, this cell is diploid because it does have 2 copies of this chromosome and also 2 copies of all the rest of the chromosomes that would be located there. Now, these chromosomes are not identical to each other, but instead they're going to be what we call homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes, or homologs, would be another way that we can refer to them. These are going to be chromosomes that contain the same type of information, but they are not identical to each other. They are, however, going to look alike. So I've tried to draw them here so that they look the same size and shape as each other. And the reason that we have 2 of these is because we are produced by sexual reproduction. And since we are produced by sexual reproduction, that means that we have 2 different parents that are contributing to the DNA that makes us up. So the way that that happens is that one of these chromosomes is going to be inherited from our mom, and that would be in the form of the egg cell. And then one of them is going to be inherited from dad, and that would be in the form of the sperm. And mom and dad do not contain the same DNA and exactly the same genetic information. However, they are going to have similar information. So when we look at these chromosomes, they are going to have what are called the same loci. And locus would be singular, loci would be plural. But we're going to have the same type of information located on these. So for example, if this is information for making protein A within our cells, both of these chromosome number 3s are going to have information for protein A located right there. If we moved further down, they would both have information for making protein B located in the same spot. Now, I've drawn the B's, one capital and one lowercase, because again, we said over here that it's not necessarily identical information, but it's going to be similar information. So these homologous chromosomes, they would be found in diploid cells, which are cells that contain 2 copies of each chromosome. And these chromosomes are going to be very similar to each other, and we're going to refer to them as homologous chromosomes.